You're watching Global Trade This Week with Pete Mento and Doug Draper.
Hey, happy Tuesday, Wednesday, everybody. This is Doug Draper with Global Trade This Week. I want to welcome you to our show, and we're doing things a little bit differently this week. We'll say that Pete is on assignment, right? That's code for vacation or something else, but he's not with us this week. But we're going to bring a very knowledgeable individual on. You can see him right there, the one, the only, the producer of the show, Keenan. He's with Cap Logistics and Icosa Media. So we reference him a lot in this show about behind the scenes, pushing the buttons and everything else. So he's still doing that, but he has some great takes on global trade, and he was nice enough to fill in. So Keenan, what's going on, my man? How are you doing?
Hey, doing well. It's a pleasure to join you today on this side of the camera, in addition to running the production side. And besides the actual media production stuff, I'm very involved with Cap Logistics, so I'm always interested in the stuff you and Pete are talking about each week. And so we often have discussions before and after the show, so I'm excited to be able to join you here today.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate it. So one last thing, just to mix things up a little bit, since we got a different co-host. Troy, who's right behind me, Keenan's going to get involved with the discussion. So there's an arrow. If Troy's a big fan of the topic, the arrow goes up. If he's not, arrow goes down. So hopefully that makes some sense. So the arrow is up because he's pretty stoked about you being on the show today, and we're excited. So that being said, you're up with topic number one.
Yeah, so as we were just discussing, maybe some of our audience have seen, but probably haven't seen, the Ever Given, that large container ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal, is now moving. So it's been 106 days since it was originally stuck for about 6 days, and then it's kind of been in this limbo mode of everyone figuring out, okay, who's paying for what, a lot of damages. So initially I heard they were asking for about $1 billion, and then publicly it was announced maybe $550 million, and we don't actually know the final settlement. So maybe it was the $500 million, maybe it's less, maybe it's more. I think insurance companies were trying to pay about $200 million. So somewhere in that range, an agreement was set. But the good news is that the Ever Given is now moving. It is on its way. I don't know the fate of all the contents on board of that. Some people probably had to get new inputs for their businesses a different way. But that stuff is moving again. So it's kind of the end of a saga that had captured the imagination of a lot of people who don't even normally pay attention to logistics and international trade.
Yeah, for sure. I think it drew the attention, right? I don't know how many memes were out there with the vessel being stuck. And I think my comment on that, Keenan, is the input, right? You said that, all right, my stuff's been on hold in the Suez Canal for 3 months. Most people, I would think, have moved on, right, knowing full well that they have no control over when or if they'll get their product back. So the interesting piece that I'll have that probably won't make much news is what are they doing with the containers when they get off, right? So if I have a container and I don't want it anymore. It's no longer my problem, right? Trash it, do whatever you want. And so it'll be interesting to see when all those containers get unloaded. A percentage will certainly go to where it needs to get, but there will be some that just are abandoned. It'll be interesting to see how that comes to fruition.
Absolutely. And it's going to be kind of a case by case depending on the customer and depending on the shipment. Our mutual friend, Roy Becker, was just in the studio yesterday and giving a bit of educational video content for the topic of Incoterms. And that really plays a role here for this situation. It all depends on what the buyer and seller had agreed to, of when does a particular container and the goods inside become delivered? When does ownership and when does risk of loss transfer? And so in some situations, the buyer probably had to take a big loss there. In other situations, it could be the seller that thought they had a sale, but they didn't technically sell it until it got delivered at the port of arrival or wherever it is. And so really depends on those terms and calls attention to how important it is to have that strategy in place. There's no one right or wrong Incoterm. It just depends on what's best for you and your situation as a company, of what you're doing and what you have for risks. And insurance isn't required on these international shipments, though it's often advised. And Incoterms also kind of delineates who's paying what insurance for what part of it. So hopefully a lot of it was insured, and it's something that can be kind of spread out across businesses and time. But undoubtedly, there will be companies either on the buying side or on the selling side that really were not expecting it, did not have insurance, and had to take quite a bit of a wash. Though, 106 days is a pretty big delay. So to your point, I imagine quite a few companies have found another source, done some air freight, a different option to get what they need.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Troy thought that was a thumbs up. So on topic number 2, it's a thumbs down. So bear with me here, okay? Just going to flip that thing around. There. And it's all related to my second topic, which is our good friends at the Postal Service, the United States Postal Service. And there was an interesting article that came out this week that I'm going to liken it to. I'm going to explain the situation, and I'm going to give you my kind of analogy on it, Keenan. So there's 21 attorney generals across our great United States that have indicated to the post office that first-class mail is the absolute priority of the Postal Service, and not to focus on parcel expansion, which is what the Postmaster General had talked about in his 10-year plan just a couple of months ago. And a few months ago, this show talked about the topic and how that's where they needed to go, and there was some they meaning the post office, and the Postmaster General was talking about a death spiral, and they're trying to do something different to move forward. And then this conflicting message comes out that the Attorney General say, hold on a second, we don't want you to focus on parcel, even though that's kind of the future. We want you to make a priority of first-class mail, which is a dying industry. But technically by law, they said the priority of the U.S. Postal Service is not to compete with private business sectors, but the priority is to focus on first-class mail. So I just thought that was kind of unique. And the only real statistic that came out of it that I had saw, statistic of meaning, was that they said if they don't focus on priority mail, then 50% of priority mail will be delayed 1 or 2 extra days. So right now the goal is 2 to 3 day transit. Now it's going to be 3 to 4 to 5 day transit. And I think if you're using the United States Post Office first class mail, you kind of what you're getting, what you're paying for, right? So if my letter to my mom for Mother's Day is going to be an extra day delayed, then I'll mail a little bit early. So my point here is the difference between vision and sight. And what I mean by that is sight is what's immediately right in front of you. You can see it. That is your sight. And I think that the attorney generals are looking at the sight perspective, where vision is looking ahead of you. What is the vision of what's happening? And we're not going back to more letters. We're not going back to most postcards. And we're not going to flyers in the mail to market to people to buy stuff, right? All of that's dying. Unfortunately, they're focused on on the sight, not the vision. So it's kind of interesting. The post office is trying to do the right thing, even though I gave them a little bit of a hard time a couple of months ago, in understanding that parcel is the wave. But yet, by law, attorney generals are trying to focus on the sight and bring them back into, kind of a different age. I kind of liken it to fax machines, right? Let's bring back the fax machine because you can get your information, quickly. It's just, I don't get it. It's frustrating.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, things have definitely been changing. So, there's a lot more packages being mailed as e-commerce has taken off. I know you and Pete have been talking about e-commerce and the rise of it for a while, and then it's only been expedited with the coronavirus pandemic and more people ordering things online. It is interesting, and there's also several other factors. I remember not all that long ago, people were very heated politically about the Postmaster General and are they affecting votes and these sorts of things, or is it right to be cutting and trying to make money? And just in seeing your topic, I looked into Benjamin Franklin is an interesting example to kind of look back, and not everything applies back in his day to our day, but he was both, from my understanding, working to create a public good, a government service that provides an essential good that wouldn't be filled by private industry, as well as he did succeed in making the Postal Service profitable. Took about 30 years or so from what I was seeing from when he founded it to making it turn a profit. And so it's an interesting role where there are other delivery services in the commercial side that could be delivering more packages, though there's an important role for those letters. And also commerce now is happening more and more that way. And so I don't have the right prescriptive answer. It is interesting to watch and observe. Something with that, though, and again, I don't have the answer, very much of an opinion, though I'm interested in the Union Postal. What is this? The Universal Postal Union. So from my understanding, if, let's say, a consumer in America were to order something from China, then once it gets to America, that good in a package, then the U.S. taxpayers and the Postal Service ends up paying the rest of the way. And so that's one area I'd like us generally to be considering as we're looking at these sorts of things, because that was originally intended for the letters, right? Family member in Italy sends a letter, and then you get it over to America, we'll take it the rest of the way to your family. But that's different now that there's a lot of e-commerce from around the world. And so I've heard some cases where an entrepreneur in America might have a product that they're selling, but they have to pay postage to ship it to their customers. Whereas someone ordering something, maybe it's slightly cheaper from China, but even if it wasn't slightly cheaper, the good itself, the Chinese company would have an advantage because they don't have to pay and the customer doesn't have to pay that final delivery cost that is just being put on the USPS as a part of this Universal Postal Union. So lots of interesting issues. What's the right mix of being a public good versus making money and being self-sustainable? The politics side aside, with all the votes and all that sort of stuff, it's interesting, just the discussion of people going on of, should this be making money? What's the priority, letters versus packages, even as we're seeing a lot more need for the packages. But as we're seeing with packages all over the place, there's just too much demand compared to the capacity supply. So it really comes down to that prioritization. And you mentioned Postmaster General DeJoy. He's outlined his 10-year vision, and I believe that included a lot more package type stuff, but then they're getting pushback. So it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's the sight versus vision, the 15 feet versus the 50. So if there's anybody in the audience that has some thoughts about some of the topics that Keenan brought up that I had not thought about, right? Who handles that final mile on an import, comment, give us some additional feedback. We're always welcome.
So, yeah, would love to hear your perspectives for sure.
Yeah. So we kind of do this thing, Keenan, called halftime, right? We just kind of spout out about some crazy ideas before we jump into our topics. I'll go first with a couple of them. I'm not sure if you had thought of a few of them or not, but the two that caught my attention is that you and I were talking before, kind of the shiny object and electric vehicles and electrification. I think I had trouble saying that one in the past before. It just seems like that's the cool thing. Everybody wants it to succeed, including myself, and they're chasing companies that may be taking advantage of that situation. There's another one called Lordstown Motors, which is being investigated. Had a lot of interest, but apparently there was some fake orders and kind of some shady business by some of the executives, which my whole point in this one, it's another shiny object, which is the EV, electric vehicle situation that seems to be faltered a little bit, right? So it's just another example. I know Nikola had some issues, and I'm not saying these are bad people or bad companies. It seems like that's a common thread with some of these startups. I don't know. It makes me a little bit nervous and wary when you hear about the new shiny object that's going to save the electric vehicle industry.
Yeah, when I hear you describe that, it reminds me of, I believe it was Gartner. They came up with a chart called the hype cycle, where a new technology will come out and you'll have really high expectations of what this could do, and you'll have a whole bunch of people creating things. So other people kind of copying Tesla, or remembering the .com era, everyone making a ton of money off of all sorts of websites, even if the business model wasn't there, right? And then there's going to be crashes or, kind of in this clean space. It reminds me of Solyndra, which I think was a different issue with more government involvement, but there's plenty of government subsidies and things involved in the EV sector as well. And so it really brings to my mind the importance of due diligence, where you may like the idea, but you have to do your homework. Are the people running this company legit? Do they have an actual business model? Are the orders real? Which then gets tough if maybe in this scandal there were some fake orders and some shenanigans going along there. So us in the public, we may not know the real information. So got to do your homework, but also know that some of the information we could be looking at might be fake. And so, it's that challenge of doing the due diligence to invest in the right companies that you want to see succeed, you think will succeed and will succeed, versus you want this to succeed. It sounds really good, but it's just a shell, or it's just an illusion, really.
Yeah, agreed. And then the last piece on the halftime, then I'll let you jump into topic number 2, is just the continued acquisition of larger companies gobbling up smaller in quotes when these are billion-dollar acquisitions. But the trend that we talked about, Pete and I did maybe 2 months ago, about look out in the summer, and in Q3 you're going to see lots of big boys buying little medium-sized guys to diversify their service offering. And just yesterday, Knight and Swift purchased AAA Cooper for a mere $1.3 billion, right? So it's tapping into their LTL network. And Werner just purchased another group, ECM Transport, for 150 mil, something like that. And then there's some tech solution companies that are being acquired. DP World, which is headquartered in Dubai, just picked up a company in Detroit called Syncreon, and they do IT support. So anyway, more acquisitions, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again and more, but coming to fruition what we spoke about a couple of months ago.
Absolutely. There was a bit of a trend in the kind of concentration or the mergers and acquisitions for a while. And this seems to have been kind of accelerated a little bit, kind of like e-commerce was growing and growing. And then you have more of an inciting event and some companies just can't make it. I remember early on in the pandemic, or maybe even slightly before, there were Celadon and some major companies were having issues and getting purchased because they just couldn't run their business as the model was. But like you were saying, other companies who want access to their network or things may have a better business model. And then there's always the case of, we're pitching to investors, hey, we can cut redundancies by not having 2 of these departments. We have 1 HR department for this whole company, right? So there's something to be said about the economies of scale there. Though it's also interesting what power dynamics might change if concentration goes to a certain level. Are certain groups going to gain an edge in pricing or controlling of the market versus others? Or this is the trend it was going to be anyway, and now we're just seeing it a little bit sooner than we otherwise would have. It's interesting. Well, I'm sure it won't be the last time we talk about this. There'll be more news announcements in the future, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, speaking of not the last time we'll talk about it, I love your second topic, right? So I'm going to let you jump into it. But first of all, I got to flip. Troy's interested in this one, so stand by. Got to flip this one around. He's a big fan.
Awesome.
All right. There we go.
Excited to discuss it. The topic is electric airplanes. Are these going to be an option? Are we going to be seeing these? So it's something kind of in the lines of EV. There's a growing demand for reducing carbon emissions, making products and services efficient from that kind of full perspective, both the cost as well as the impact of environmental impacts, which aren't always taken into consideration. So I got this idea from watching Wendover Productions. I'll put a link in the show notes. If anyone hasn't heard of them, they do some interesting little short documentaries on various topics. And this one is right in line with what we always like to talk about, kind of that forward looking of what could be down the horizon, because we currently don't have electric airplanes moving cargo or people around, though the Wendover crew did a nice job outlining why this might become a case in the near future. So airlines are concerned about climate change, not just for the marketing of trying to appear green, but they're seeing the writing on the wall that more and more countries or groups of countries are going to be doing some sort of regulations. One in particular that Wendover talked about was in Europe, there are a fair number of short haul flights that people are flying, but they could go by train. And so when they do the analysis of the carbon footprint by train, it's a lot less. And so some of these countries have talked about potentially eliminating those short flights and encouraging their citizens to go by train instead. And I guess the flights could maybe still go for connector purposes, but they would be shifting consumer behavior to go by train instead of by flying. And so with that as a background, these companies are trying to be more proactive of what they can do before regulation comes in and forces them to do something where they don't have too many options. And so one of the interesting areas is electric aircraft. So they don't have the ability to fly very far with electric. Over the last 10 years, as we've seen a lot of advances with companies like Tesla or all sorts of other ones, even the major Fords, GMs, they're all getting into electric vehicles. And they have done a really good job, like solar panels, in bringing that cost per unit down, though they really haven't had a reason to bring the weight down. So while the cost of batteries and energy storage has gone down a lot, they're not necessarily lightweight. And so you end up getting in this situation where if you want to make a flight around the world, you need more and more batteries, but then you need to use more electricity to carry the weight of the batteries. And so at least until we have some major battery technology breakthrough, we're not going to be flying around the world with electric planes. However, on those short hauls, there is an opportunity because we apparently have that technology now. I guess there have been kind of model electric airplanes decades ago. And there was one that came out last year, and then Buy Aerospace just announced a new one this year after Wendover even made that documentary. And so it's interesting. We're seeing the rise of, right now, I think it's more, hobby type. I want an electric plane, kind of like how Tesla started with the most expensive type of supercar electric, but their goal was to make it cheaper and more mass available. So we could end up seeing some of these, 200 miles, 250 miles and less. Those routes may have an area already, even without changing regulations, that have a good business case to use these electric airplanes. And then any operator, any airline that builds those are going to have a competitive advantage even more so if and when regulation and other issues come down the pipeline in the near future. They'll be well positioned as they're using electricity. So it's off in the future. We don't know what it's going to look like, but I wanted to bring it to our audience's attention that this is something that companies are designing electric aircraft, and we could be seeing these in service for people and then eventually for cargo too.
Yeah, no, I agree. Where there's two points on that. Number one, where there's additional demand, innovation will follow, right? And we saw that with the electric vehicles. 10 years ago, people were worried about being stranded on the highway because the juice ran out. And what do we do about that? And the innovation has really advanced that. So I think that's great. It will continue to happen. You nailed the one point I was going to say, is that you need a lot of power to get a plane off the ground. And in its current state, that means a bigger battery. Mm-hmm. Batteries are heavy. So there's more weight, so you need a bigger battery with more power, and so on and so forth. So, I always joke that, this phone right here has more technology in it than the group that landed on the moon, right? So it's coming. You got the demand, so it's going to drive innovation. It's just the weight. Like, you can only do so much in the air when there's so much weight, and if you don't have an equal balance between power and that weight, it's gonna literally slow things down, but it'll come around. It'll come around. I think it's an interesting topic to continue to follow for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're going to leave the arrow up. Troy's into this one too. So we're 3 of 4 with positive news on this episode, Keenan. So usually Pete and his Johnny Cat. We got to bash Pete a little bit on this one, right? But the man in black, Johnny Cash himself of logistics and supply chain and global trade. I think we have about 50-50 positive and negative, but we're 75% because we got 3 positive and 1 negative. But my last one here is specific to the port of New Orleans. Nolans, as maybe it's correctly pronounced, but I just like to say they're just getting stuff done in the port. There's action around their need, and what I mean by that is they're doing some RFPs for some major expansion, and they're doing something, right? They're realizing that the ports are congested and all the things that we've talked about. And I'm sure there's ports out there that are doing some things, but as far as a major expansion that's going to take 3, 4, 5 years to get done. Yeah, it doesn't happen overnight, but gosh darn it, Port of New Orleans is doing something. And that led me to think of this, right? So the SPACs, right, special purpose acquisition companies are kind of the cool thing now. And I could see, because where there is a demand and there is money to be made in logistics, that we've seen a lot of outside industry investment, is that I could see SPACs getting into the infrastructure development of ports and the connectors that we've spoken about before to release the bottlenecks that are happening as you're moving freight. So I don't know. I'm sure they're out there as well, but I think that there's going to be a lot of SPACs. They're going to say, we can make a ton of money. Let's invest. Let's buy a company that specializes in this and really blow it up with an IPO and see what we can do to make some money on increasing capacity and infrastructure at ports. So the forward thinking here is outside investment through special purpose acquisition companies into the infrastructure of ports, because somebody's got to do something, and I applaud New Orleans for doing something and getting things moving. So there's my second take there, Keenan.
Absolutely. It's very interesting that they are expanding and what those new models of expansion might look like. I'm not super familiar with who has funded America's ports in the past, the various authorities and who's all actually raising money, private and public money to do that. Most recently, in the past couple of years, you hear about nations like China investing heavily in building ports in Africa or around the Asia-Pacific area where they want to expand their influence. So it'd be interesting to see if SPACs could be a model where we could raise money to develop these. It's interesting because a lot of people in the stock market, they like to see quick, easy gains. A lot of people are very focused on this quarter, next quarter, or the next quarter after that, compared to infrastructure like this. Takes a lot of time to plan and design, takes a lot of time to build, and there's a lot of money involved. And more like public utilities, you need to amortize that over a long period of time to see that positive return. That being said, there's also been some situations, Jigger Shaw comes to mind with Son Edison, where by inventing a new way of capitalizing a project, like in his case, solar panels, he was able to create a new product that people here and now would find benefits in and raise that money to put in long-term infrastructure. So there could be something to what you're talking about with using the SPACs as a way of raising this money. I'd be curious to see what type of investor appetite is out there, all the other coordinations along with it, though. Yeah, as we've been seeing into the beginning of your point there, ports on the West Coast, East Coast have been very busy, backed up. So, in my mind, I often think of New Orleans doing a lot of agricultural type shipping, but maybe now they're expanding to be able to take a little bit of that capacity away from some of the coast ports that are so backed up right now. It'll be interesting to see. It's a strategic, could be a good investment. On the logistics side, we like to see more capacity and options to provide for our customers. So great topic, great point. I was unaware that they had announced that, so I'll be keeping an eye on New Orleans and what they're doing and what other ports might be doing similarly.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point that, to be honest with you, I had not really thought of this angle, right? But the SPACs and IPOs, they want to pop, right? They want to make some money. They want the here and now. That would be the site in my previous, analogy. They're looking at the site. What can we do here and now? where infrastructure doesn't happen overnight. That is a long-term investment. But you made a good point that somebody somehow is going to find a way to monetize that and get the pop, right? And how that comes to fruition, that's above my pay grade. But, hey, here's a long-term investment, but we're going to find a way to give you immediate return. Somebody will come up with that in a unique way. I may not understand it. I'm just a simple guy from Kansas, but I think that's a very valid point, is that people want a pop and a hit. That's what's exciting. Infrastructure investment is more long-term. So there'll be something in there will be created to accomplish both.
And there may be some additional abbreviations that the industry comes up with that we learn, or maybe we can come up with some new abbreviations of, what that is, where we can take, hey, people are used to paying $3,000 per container. It's lately been $18,000 per container. That's a huge mismatch. We need more capacity. Where are we going to get the money to build this capacity? And someone might come up with a clever way of making a bunch of money or routing a bunch of money into that type of investment. So, yeah, it's curious. Be fascinating to watch as it keeps rolling out.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Keenan, that ends the show. Global Trade This Week is wrapping it, and you're giving Pete a run for his money. I appreciate that, and it's fun that our audience gets a chance to see you and your takes and your perspective on logistics and supply chain is dynamite. So Pete usually does the intro, I do the outro, or vice versa. So I kicked us off, so I'll let you take us home and wrap things up.
Well, looking forward to having more conversations with the three of us when Pete is back in the future, and just kind of going on your topic of optimism versus pessimism. He is an economist, and economics is the dismal science, so it's understandable. There's a lot of bad news when you're looking from a perspective of scarcity and how do we allocate scarce resources. And we could definitely appreciate that, and there's a lot of value in that perspective. Though for our show here today, I guess there's a little bit more positive news, from getting the ships cleared out to what's coming down in the future. So generally I am optimistic, and I think we can end the show on a good optimistic note, and I'm sure there'll be more news, good and bad, coming up in the future here for us to talk about and speculate on what's coming. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. This is brought to you by CAP Logistics. We're a proud sponsor of education and learning about the industries, what we can all do to make our businesses run better. So thank you, CAP Logistics, and thank you, Doug, for having me on. And Pete, I'm sure you're watching. I'll be seeing you next week.
All right.
Have a good day, everybody.
Yeah, you too. Take care.